Hey guys, welcome to Signal Before Silence. In today's episode, I want to go over Iran's history from a zoomed out perspective because it paints a very interesting picture and it makes a lot of the arguments from the Israeli side more understandable, even though, of course, they can argue the right thing but not do the right thing. So that's what people are revolting against. But it is interesting to look at that zoomed out and look at the ethnic demographic of Iran, all the various dynasties that came and left, the Arabization, the Turkification. Basically, Iran was extremely multicultural for most of history. It housed a lot of people from different nationalities. You can kind of say they were the original globalists. Maybe they still are. Some theories exist, but I'm not going to go into those. I'm just going to go with what we know is history, but just really look at this insanely long history from a very zoomed out perspective, because it changes things when you look at that versus when you look at just what's happening today. And it also will explain why so many Christians do not see how absurdly predatory Israel is against both the world and Christianity and everybody else. This will be an interesting episode. One of my episodes got taken down by YouTube. It got deleted. My episode 15 and 28 now are both gone, and multiple other episodes have been demonetized. For a quick moment, I'm going to address my audience before I jump into the episode. So if you're here specifically for the episode, check the timestamps below and jump to the beginning of that so that you can skip the part that's not interesting to you. But I do want to say it's been really interesting to watch and observe, try to figure out this algorithm. I wonder if there's a huge portion that belongs to the comments that determines whether the episode is problematic or not, because I don't moderate my comments. I told you guys from the beginning, I don't believe in moderating it or deleting the comments or even setting my settings for YouTube to delete the comments that are problematic. And I wonder if that is causing problems for the channel. So I don't want to necessarily change that, but I do want to ask you, if you were supportive of me, actually maybe refrain from crazy comments that you know for a fact is not allowed, right? Like if I say it, it's gonna be flagged. But protocol type comments or ownership type comments, things that are nowadays very anti-Semitic. I'm just curious how much of it is what I say and how much of it is what the comments say. It dawned upon me when I was arguing with someone on the internet, and he was basically painting me under this light, and then I kept obviously just getting defensive. And then he was like, well, I'm just going off of the comments under your videos. And I'm like, that's just the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. Like, I'm responsible for the words that comes out of my mouth, not other people who I'm, I guess, allowing technically to comment. I'm not going to turn off my comments. I'm not going to delete comments. But I am going to ask you guys just to experiment together. I am the type of person who experiments a lot. I can't even brush my teeth without experimenting. For example, I went 6 months of brushing my teeth, then having my morning coffee, and then shifting and having my morning coffee, then brushing my teeth to see, what does it yield a different result? Like, does it stain more one way or the other? And I've decided that I brush my teeth, then have my coffee. But I'm always experimenting with everything, and this is yet another thing that I kind of want to experiment, but I'm going to ask for your help with that. So keep the comments very respectful for a few episodes. I'm just really interested in understanding this, and I think it will be good for everybody to understand that. So just to keep it cordial, keep it respectful, and not say anything that we know for a fact is today crazy and considered anti-Semitic. But at the same time, I'm not going to necessarily not talk about Israel, because again, I'm interested to see, is it my speech or the comment section that's driving a lot of this algorithmic stuff. And another thing that dawned upon me, Protocols was the episode that was bringing the most users to my account. So I was gaining traction through that particular episode. I was getting a lot of comments like, oh, this is how I found you. This is great. And then a lot of comments like, oh, I'm so surprised this is allowed. How come this is not taken down yet? So I wonder if those are the things that sometimes also gets captured by the algorithm. And of course, another suspicion is I did get one very negative remark by a person under that particular episode. And I wonder if they reported the channel and also asked, like, kind of, ganged up against and just mass reported the channel or something, because that's another suspicion. Because they don't tell me what was hate speech. I'm literally just... There was no hate speech. That was one of those episodes where I go above and beyond for 10 minutes talking about how not all Jews belong to this category of particular Zios that we talk about. So all in all, just curious to test things out. And also, speaking about anti-Semitism, so I saw something insane recently. I saw the word noticing, the shirt, stop noticing, the word noticing is going around. And I saw some crazy comment as if how the word noticing is problematic and anti-Semitic, and it's actually just defined as such, which obviously it's a random English word. That's just absurd. So I Googled it, and what do you know? Like, check this out. Yes, noticing, often referred to as the noticing or noticing, is a recognized anti-Semitic dog whistle and coded phrase used online, particularly popular among far-right extremist groups. Ooh, we're very far-right than extremists, aren't we? Neo-Nazis, and on platforms like X, Telegram, and 4chan. Here's a breakdown, and just goes into it and just creates this entire absolute dog shit of an excuse as to how a word in the English dictionary, such as notice or noticing, is a problematic language. So my shirt stop noticing becomes even more relevant in this case. And I doubled down and I dropped this one. So I want you guys to take a look. New merch that I dropped. I know I usually leave the merch at the end, but I'm going to bring this up actually. This design, of course, is a bit more ballsy and for those who don't care. But I also did a very more, I guess, mild version of it where it has, I really like the T turned into the cross because it's just very fitting in my opinion, because this does feel like a spiritual battle. This does feel like there's insane, crazy attack on Christianity and wanting to eradicate Christianity. So I do think this very simple version I really like a lot. In this map version, I didn't put the cross just so that, not everybody might want the cross. But anyway, so I dropped new merch, and I also decided to drop a notebook called The Great Noticing. And this is not anti-Semitism. I just refuse, more like trolling, but I just refuse that you can just grab any words like Christ is King. And by the way, the cross, the reason I like the cross is also because the Christ is King became anti-Semitic as well. So you just basically grab things that are completely harmless or they're random words in the dictionary, but because it's being used to criticize the shenanigans that's taking place, now that's a problem. So yeah. So I decided to do a notebook in case people, it's an interesting time, in case people are writing thoughts down or keeping diaries or trying to make sense of it in a written format. And then, of course, a cup, notice and reject. I didn't put the and in there, but anyway, so that's some new merch. And of course, I have all the old merch there too. I hope you guys check it out and try to support me in that way. And let me know if you like these new designs. I'm not necessarily a troll usually, but that just somehow got under my skin that you just take a word and you decide that, well, no, that's a problem because we don't want you noticing. So hence the noticing becomes an anti-Semitic problem. Yeah, that's a hard no for me. Okay, so let's jump into the Iranian history. Boy, where do I begin? I'm going to go through a list that I pulled up. It took me a while to get Gemini to give me a proper table list because it just kept not understanding what I want. And also, of course, is trying to fit multi-thousand-year history into a table format, which is really hard. But I think finally we got somewhat close to having that zoomed out perspective that we can take a look at and see where that takes us, because I have some thoughts and some internal debates, and those people who are watching, and Iranian especially, feel free to comment as to what's your take. Just keep in mind, I'll say this because I say this in some of my episodes. I stopped saying this for the Zayo episodes because it just didn't seem to matter. But I genuinely do care for people to understand when I'm talking about a zoomed out perspective of an overall thing, it's not obviously, it has nothing to do with individuals of that culture, individuals of that religion. I judge people by the content of their character. I have nothing but respect for Iranians, but I don't know if I accidentally might, upset one or two, because they're not all unanimously believing the same thing, obviously, right? I have very negative views on Islam, so hence any Iranian that's hardcore Islamic is not going to perhaps like what I have to say. There's no way every Iranian is going to be happy with this episode. I offend Armenians all the time, even though you guys can see how proud of an Armenian I am. But, not every Armenian sees through the same lens as I do, so sometimes they just disagree. So same extends to Iran, same extends to Iranians. No disrespect, nothing but respect here, but I am going to just very openly just kind of toss up ideas and kind of think out loud about what I'm saying. And you're welcome to obviously comment below and educate everyone as to what your view is as a particular individual of that culture. All right, so we kind of see what's happening today. Because we disapprove of what US and Israel are doing in the Middle East, we are, of course, quick to all of a sudden turn around and say or think that we've been duped. Islam is great and we are the problem. Because I think people look for very simple explanation to things, but of course it's just so complex. There are individuals involved with their individual egos and sins like power, envy, greed, right? Like things that they want. There are people involved that are ideological and they're more of the bring the Messiah type, right? Just more religiously focused. There are people who are pro-West for their purposes, and there are people who are pro-East for their purposes, and then there are people who are neutral. And then, of course, there's oil companies and corporations, there's globalists, there's communists. It's not as easy as, oh, okay, so Israel bad, that means Islamic regime good. And I say this all the time, that's binary thinking. We just always look for these, this is good, this is evil. If this is evil, then this is good. But sometimes both things can be evil or two things can be good at the same time. And here it's really hard to really get to the bottom of it. All we can see is right now, Israel and US have been on the wrong trajectory visibly, right? You cannot in any way justify a genocide of people. Doesn't matter who these people are. Doesn't matter how much they dehumanize Palestinians to be, oh, they're Muslim, they're extremists, they're individuals. Among them, they're not all radical terrorists, right? Just like now they're talking about Iranians being radical terrorists. Majority of Iranians despise Islamic regime. So needless to say, they are not at all radical terrorists, and what's happening is not justifiable. Not to mention, we can see that it's harming US. It is not helping US in any way, no matter how you look at it. Some people might be able to justify that. Even if we were to secure Strait of Hormuz, it just doesn't really help us much. It's a mess, and we're reacting to that mess. But again, let's zoom out and take a look at this. I'm not going to go into the details of every single dynasty because every single dynasty would take multiple episodes on its own. So again, keeping it zoomed out. So first, I guess, let's look at Iran's population, ethnic groups, okay? So there's 93 million people there, and majority ethnic groups. Persian, 51 to 61%. So that's the percent of Persian people who speak Farsi. However, among this 51 to 61% Persians, there's going to be a lot of mix. I don't know how well Persians particularly preserved their DNA. They are not known to have been isolated like Armenians. They actually have been very multicultural and accepting of others, whereas Armenians, whether it's purely geographically or we were smart enough to understand that there's some kind of a, I don't know, something with that DNA that maybe we should preserve, we have preserved it. Georgian people have also preserved their Caucasian genetics very well. But again, those are very isolated countries, kind of obviously next to each other. And here we have a lot of mix. You will see what has taken place in Persia. That will make sense. Then you have up to 24% Azerbaijani. Azerbaijanis are people I have spoken about before, and I am going to do quite a few episodes when I get to them about them, because it is extremely interesting to look at their made-up history, because they're making up history as we speak, which means it becomes really interesting to be like, oh, okay, I see how this is working. I can observe the psychology of those receiving it, and that can give us an interesting perspective what might have happened in history when we're talking about the creation of Israel and how this entire propaganda began. So with Azeris, they are basically Turkic people. They speak Turkish. They are ethnically Turkish mixed with the locals. So basically quite similar to a lot of the Ashkenazi. Kurds are also local Caucasians, but by now they have mixed quite a bit also. Lurs, I am not as familiar with the Lurs. Iranian people living mainly in the western and southern Iran, okay? And Gilaki and Mazandarani, 8%. My understanding is Mazandaran, this is Persian tribes, like Lurs. So then smaller percentage of, Arabs. And I would argue that potentially there's going to be a lot of Arabs that have mixed with Persians. I go about DNA because I do think DNA carries message from our ancestors, and Persians are a great example of a DNA that has rejected a lot of the mixture, not in a sense that they haven't mixed, but in a sense that they have remained Persian. Like, let's say Palestinians and Lebanese, they fully got absorbed into calling themselves Arab and speaking Arabic, and basically they completely let go of the DNA roots, right? Canaanite for Lebanese and Aegean Sea people for the Palestinians. They call themselves Arabs and they just gave in to that culture. The Persians, they rejected that for the most part. So kind of like Armenians, where if we mixed with someone, then we just lost those people, right? They're like, majority of Turkey is current modern day Turkey. If they take DNA tests, they're pretty much just Greek and Armenian. But we've lost those people. Now they're Turks. And similarly, those Armenians who became Muslim and decided to belong to another culture were like, okay, well, they're no longer Armenian. So those Armenians that remain Armenian, those are now Armenian. So for the Persians, I don't know if that's the case. Correct me if that is the case. So are there actual 100% Persian DNA now, or has it been quite mixed? I can definitely do research on that, but I don't want to get into it in this episode. So, and then of course Turkmen and so on and so forth. The Persian linguistics, the national language is Farsi or Persian, however people say it, but it's the same thing. But they use Arabic for the script, because during the Arabization process, actually Persian was banned. Even the language was banned, but then it went through a revival period where they brought back the language, but they continued using the Arabic script. They added like 4 more characters to the alphabet to make it more robust, and they've been using Arabic script to write Farsi, but the language was brought back. Okay, so what I did here is I wanted to call out the empire, the years that they were enrolled, the ethnicity of the empire, because I think it's important, and also what they accomplished versus what was their criticism or what they did wrong. Back in the BC days, this is too far back, so some people might not care, but I guess it's important. So Medes, those are the pre-Persian people, same people, just kind of like Armenians were Urartu during the BC days. And Urartu just means Ararat. Ararat means Armenia. So from what I see, that Medes and Persian, they're the same people. The first unification of Iranian tribes. So this is when they create an empire, lacked a central administration. I'm going to probably butcher some of these pronunciations because I'm torn between my understanding of the Armenian language pronunciation versus how the English pronounce. But Akhmenid, maybe. So 550 to 330 BC, this is a Persian empire. This is the Cyrus the Great Empire. Obviously, Cyrus the Great didn't rule for multiple centuries, but when he was alive, each dynasty would have many rulers that I haven't necessarily called out because usually not every ruler is significant. There's just good or bad. But Cyrus the Great is the one that Persian Empire romanticizes a lot. During this time, they became the world's first global superpower, and there was a lot of art, culture, architecture. It was blooming. They were very multicultural, actually. This is the Cyrus the Great who called Jews back, according to history, and sometimes I wonder if that's true history or were these particular Jews very different type of tribes, or was this where the mistakes started happening? But either way, Cyrus the Great brought back Jews after they took over Babylon. They brought back Jews to rebuild the second temple, and they were very good to all ethnic groups. And then in 336, they lose to the Greek Empire. During Cyrus the Great, basically across the sea, there was a lot of little small battles between Greeks and Persians kind of poking at each other. And then eventually Alexander the Great, when he saw an opportunity, he basically came and took that entire region by storm. He took all of Persia, and he also actually took Egypt. He took a lot. He went way beyond any borders anyone had seen, I think. And then he blended the Greek and Persian cultures. But he also burned and destroyed Persepolis, which I guess one way he was showing his might is that he is capable of destruction. But at the same time, from the other end, there would be some building going on too. So this is a Greek Empire just taking over and then just basically Hellenizing Persians. So this goes on for a couple of centuries. Seleucid continues. That's the Greek Empire. They built dozens of Hellenistic cities, treated Persians as subjects. But another thing that's interesting, he didn't take over that area and call it Greek Empire. Persia remained Persian Empire. Alexander the Great kind of just saw it, loved it, and was like, yeah, I'm cool, chilling. A lot of the cultures kind of merged in a way. Then we go into the Parthian Empire, which pretty much are the same Persian people, but from the north, if I recall. They're more northern horse riding people of the same region versus, let's say, the southwestern Persians. But they are Persian. They're of the same stock. And this is when they defeated Rome and controlled Silk Road. Silk Road becomes quite important. I think from here on, a lot of fights start happening just for the roads. Kind of like right now, we keep talking about Strait of Hormuz, right? That's a road for trade. Sassanian Empire. This is a Persian empire and one of the pretty much last Persian empires that had a golden age before Islam, but they were religiously intolerant. Sassanian Empire is what we fought with in 451 AD. At the same year, Christianity decided to schism. This is when Rome decided just to take off into something else. Armenians were, I can never say this word, but I need to learn it. But basically there's a word that describes the one nature of Jesus versus the two nature of Jesus, which became the Roman doctrine and the Roman understanding of how to define Jesus. Armenians believed in one nature, and they thought that it might create confusion and hypocrisy if if we start redefining all these little details. And in my opinion, they were right, or we were right, because it has divided Christianity and it feels like pretty much it's conquered, right? Because this is the first schism. And 451 AD, Persians basically told Armenians, you convert to Zoroastrianism or you die. And Armenians fought till death. And this is a very interesting battle that took place because it's kind of hard to tell who won. Technically, in technical terms, physically, the Persians won because their army was 3 times the size of the Armenian. An Armenian army wasn't even an army. It was just basically army / all the people with their forks and knives. But the Persian army was 3 times bigger, so hence, of course, they butchered the heck out of us. And the reason why we didn't particularly lose is because we were granted to keep our religion. When the Persians saw how we were fighting just for the sake of keeping Christianity, they actually decided to just step back and just not force that anymore, which is quite interesting because back in the day, even though human animal was all the same, fighting and butchering each other, blood and savagery was happening, but there was a bit more honor. Like, I feel like now there's no honor. It's nothing but tricking, backstabbing, surprising. When I read history, it doesn't seem like that's how it was. There was a respect towards your enemy. And nowadays, what is being done is you dehumanize your enemy until everybody around you thinks that these are not even people, they don't deserve to live. Then you attack and butcher them in very unfair ways. So there's no respect. It's cowardly, in my opinion. And I think back in the days, it was better when even if people were fighting, they had respect for one another, and it was more of a power fight, equal fight, rather than sneaky, crappy tactics. But don't get me wrong, people butchered each other all the same. So Sassanian Empire was the last Persian empire. Then come the Arabs, and this is quite interesting to me because the caliphates that came during this years, 651 to 821, obviously there's many of them. The Umar, the Rashid was a popular one. And these are the Quraysh. These are the Quraysh. They belong to the Quraysh tribe. And the Quraysh is the tribe that Muhammad was fighting with. The way Islam just kind of began. Can I put this on the screen? Oh, nice. Okay. This is something I built long time ago. I was studying the history of Islam and reading the Quran and so on. And I really wanted to understand what was going on. And basically, Muhammad has his first revelation in Mecca. Then he starts preaching and stuff. And then there's this clan, this Quraysh tribe, who's very powerful in that region. And Muhammad wants what they have. Very spiritual. I know I'm going to sound disrespectful because, I don't respect it. So he starts publicly preaching, and then it says persecution. Like, okay. So basically this guy is going around and telling the existing noblemen that they're no shit and they're doing everything wrong and attacking them sometimes. And then again, these Quraysh elites are shutting him up, right? They're the elites of that region. Then his wife dies, then Muhammad migrates to Medina, and over there he just gains quite a bit of following. And then this is the big famous Battle of Badr that happens that Muslims often bring up without bringing up the details. Battle of Badr, okay? It's Muhammad with his 300 men ambushing the Quraysh caravan to take what they to take their trade. Basically, the caravan is carrying trade, and they won it. So they attack it, ambush it. Quraysh knew that might happen, so they retaliate with 1,000 people. But actually, the Muslims happen to win, even though with much devastation. And this is when they think this is divine, this is godly, and so on and so forth, because obviously, 300 versus 1,000, which is really interesting because every nation, every culture has this thing, right? Maybe this has happened in history, or maybe all of them are wrong, or maybe some of them are wrong. The Armenians have this, right? I just told you the Battle of Avaraid. It was basically 3 times the size of our army. And then the Spartans have similar story. Now the Muslims have similar stories. Sometimes I wonder how much of it is just recycled story. With the Armenian one, majority of the sources is not our sources. Majority of our history has been rebuilt through our enemies and our neighbors and surrounding cultures who have written about us as people of that region. And because the Armenian history has been so deliberately burnt and destroyed so many times that we had to constantly rebuild through the lens of other people's eyes, and then science and archaeology. So it's really hard to know. I guess it's not abnormal for one guy to be jumped by 3, so technically, you know. Anyway, Muhammad starts it. They keep telling you and gaslighting you that everything is in self-defense. They don't attack first. It's all self-defense. It's not true. It is absolutely not true. I was going to be more disrespectful. But their entire spiritual book starts with, a lot of this, by the way, this is history. This is not in their spiritual book. There's only a mention of the Battle of Badr for a moment. But anyway, why am I going through Islamic thing? Because Muhammad and the Quraysh, they decide to create a treaty, and then all of a sudden we see Quraysh, where is it? And then all of a sudden we see Quraysh actually accepting that doctrine. So yeah, Muhammad completely becomes a military leader. So 630, it was the conquest of Mecca, and then 632 Muhammad dies, right? And then we have, only a couple decades later, Quraysh, who was the enemy at first of Muhammad, then takes that doctrine. They actually manage, I guess, to convert them. And then they bring that to Persia. They come and take over. And this is why sometimes I say, don't let people to gaslight you. Don't let people to tell you how they don't believe in this. They don't believe in fights. It's the peaceful religion. There is no such thing as love or peace in Islam. Number one goal of Islam is for the world to be Islamic. This part is true. When Israel is exploiting this propaganda, there's truth to it. That's why it works. That's why it has worked. Because when the caliphates came to that region, and then later the Turks who came to that region, the Mongols, like, they took Islam because it was the best weapon and the best justification to butcher people, and they swept that region. Okay, there was a beautiful civilization between the Greek civilization, the Persian civilization, the Armenian, and they eradicated through Islam. Why does feminism work? Like, is it because all females are just freaking crazy and gullible and they bite? No, it's because it's very masterfully done to hijack your emotions, because every female at some point in their lives has come across a creep or a bad male that's treating her really badly. And hence, when the feminist message all of a sudden says something that triggers you, like, oh, that is so true, I didn't think of that. This is why these propaganda and psychological warfares work really well, because what they do is they find what's true and they amplify it into being the only reality, right? Let's say if one guy is a piece of shit, they make it sound like every guy is a piece of shit. And then females who have maybe had experience with the piece of shit guy, pardon my French, then they just eat it up. And similarly, Islam, what the propaganda that's coming out of Bibi Netanyahu's mouth, there's truth to that. The only problem is everything he's saying is an exploitation of that truth. It's not because he actually gives a damn about Christians and Christianity being the resistance against Islam expanding and so on and so forth. No. Absolutely not. I would argue that those people would be Armenians. So Armenians who have been in the middle of all this BS, constantly suppressed, constantly killed, massacred, butchered, and we still today exist, granted at this stage weak, very weak, extremely weak, embarrassingly weak, but we have been that resistance that has still kept a Christian foot in that region. And then, of course, Greeks, but they fall a little bit more into scattered in the seas, much more paradisic location than our harsh mountains, because of what happened with Islam coming and killing by the millions, burning all the books, burning all the literature, burning all the cities, destroying, converting, forcing people to pretty much be slaves to Islam or convert. And even sometimes when people converted, they still were treated poorly. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. This is true history, because Islam is taking the opportunity right now to gaslight the crap out of people, to try to seem like they're all of a sudden just angels sitting there. There's nothing, there's no jihad, there's no, nothing in their book says kill everybody consistently throughout the book. Okay, so, and then all of a sudden comes Israel, completely made up state that happens years later, possibly made up people who hijack somebody else's identity and wearing it as a garment because they look like Genghis Khan's children. They totally, absolutely behave like Turkic tribes. And again, I'm not talking about all Jews. I'm not talking about all Jews. It's crazy we have to say these things. There are a ton of Jews who have nothing to do with this, not to mention there are a ton of Jews who are extremely anti-Zionist. But the Zionists, of course, want to say there's no difference between Jews and Zionism. Granted, I'm not a fan of Judaism either, because their religion is problematic. Zionism is a secular version of Judaism. But again, not every person who belongs to that tribe, let's call it, is the same. Not to mention, genetically, they're exceptionally diverse. Exceptionally diverse. So the particular Russian-speaking Bolshevik Jews that currently are the Chabad Lubavitch type Ashkenazi oftentimes, they're very different. I think they're very different. And every single time I study history, behavior, genetics, I go back to thinking they're actually a mix of Turkic and Caucasian people of the region. Caucasian being people like me, from Armenian highlands, from, Persia, from Greece, from Georgia, and so on. The point is, what Bibi does, not very masterfully, because you can see that he's full of garbage, he uses this known history to create psychological warfare so that things go his way, even though his goals have nothing to do with our goals, right? That we have nothing to do with one another. Christianity wants to preserve, wants to go back to its original roots, wants to restore unity. There's a particular set of moral values that doesn't believe in butchering and slaughtering people, whereas their doctrine is quite the opposite and very different. Not to mention combined with very personal, egotistical human nature and goals, right? Like just this fact that Bibi Netanyahu is a wanted, there's a warrant against him for an arrest. He's a wanted criminal. He is keeping the wars going, in my opinion. One of the reasons is literally for his selfish personal reasons so that he doesn't go to prison, I think. Combined, of course, with many other things, because there's enough religious morons who believe that this is the moment, this is the end times, and the Messiah is going to come. Their Messiah doesn't match with our Messiah, even though Christian Zionists are helping them to bring their Messiah that's not our Messiah. So it's just like, what? It is a shit show. But again, he's using true history to advance his goals. That's why it's effective, and that's why there are so many Jews who actually do not understand why we don't understand how big of a threat Islam is. Because Islam came and swept that region. And given that we live in a different era, I'm not sure if, let's say, there weren't nuclear powerheads, Islam wouldn't continue. Like, Turkey has goals to expand into pan-Turkism, which takes over, the prior Islamic regions. That includes Europe, for example. Turkey wants Europe. The reason why this works so well, and the reason why you see Jews thinking like they are truly the heroes that are stopping this is because there's truth to the history of it. There's just no truth to their actions, to what Netanyahu has been doing for his personal gains. And then, of course, it becomes even more of a problem when you realize that Judaism wants to eradicate Christianity. So technically, what it ends up being is they're both the enemies and they both need to be stopped. And we shouldn't be constantly used for the advancement of the goal of these people. So now, let's go back to Persia a little bit. That was a rant. Okay, so the Muslims come, bring Islam to Persia. They also Arabized the region. Like they forced the Arabic language, Arabic script. They were not allowed to use Farsi anymore. They introduce Islam and basically silence and ban Persian. Yeah, they absolutely ban Persian. Then, sometime later, the Safarid Empire, which is a Persian empire, for a second peeps its head for a couple of centuries, less than a couple of centuries, about 140 years or so, and they actually revived the Persian language. They revive the language, but they continue using Arabic script. They add 4 extra letters to Arabic script, and that becomes actually a better script for them to use for their language, because prior to that, they were using Pahlavi. Does that word sound familiar? Reza Shah Pahlavi. Pahlavi, this Shah that now we keep seeing that the West wants to restore and has restored a couple of times, the father of this guy and the grandfather of that guy that we have today. And they're the ones who actually renamed Persia to Iran. Just basically wrote to the nations and said that we're now called Iran and do not use Persia anymore. And that had to do with the fact that they wanted to bring back the Aryan understanding of Iran, Aryan. And Pahlavi gets attached to their dynasty name because they want to also revive perhaps that ancient roots. But of course, they never touched the script. They keep using Arabic script because Pahlavi script technically was Aramaic letters. And then with the little twist and turn, it was called Pahlavi, but it was actually Aramaic underneath all that, which is very, very interesting on its own. I have to one day go into Aramaic language and Armenian and see what you guys think, and send you all doing research because it's very, very interesting. Okay, now they revived the Persian language. Thank God to that, right? And you can see here that the Persians, obviously, you know, they're taken over by multiple centuries by Arabs, but the Persians fought and took back again and brought back their language. Good for them. Really respect this a lot. And then, okay, a phone call came through. I had to pick it up because I'm building the deck tomorrow. So we were just kind of planning the logistics of it. And then now I lost the train of my thought. Let's see where we're at. They were just basically fighting the foreigners who had invaded their land for a good long time, actually. But it's interesting that during that time they didn't become Arabs like some other nations who just kind of gave in and gave in. Persians, quite a few of them resisted and they took back control. Armenians definitely resisted and they never got Arabized. We never lost our language, we never lost our script, we never gave that up. And then Greeks, despite heavy pressure, they also did not give in to it. But many other nations like Syrians and, you know, I guess there were much weaker nation states or not even nation states rather than tribes. A lot of tribes got just swallowed by them. And then here come the Seljuk Turks, again with Islam. And they came and reunified the Islamic world. I remember a long time ago, don't quote me on this, I need to look back at this. I remember reading that before then they were Buddhists, just like Mongols. And then they're just like, oh, this Muslim business, this Muslim God actually blesses the things we want to do. This is beautiful. And yeah, that's my interpretation. They took Islam and came in with far more crazy force than ever before. 10 37. So this is when that region is just never the same again. 1071 is the Battle of Manzikert. A lot of Christians know this because that's what triggered the Crusades. Battle of Manzikert, the Seljuk Turks came on Armenian soil, did this massive battle, and Armenians completely lost. Armenia belonged at that time to the Byzantine Empire. So that entire, both Byzantine Empire and Armenian, lands and Armenian people lost everything to a degree where the Armenian elite moved to Cilicia and actually created a kingdom there. Then from there, we actually helped the Crusades a lot. The alarms were sound that we need help, not just the Armenians, but the Byzantine Empire. And then that's when Rome basically pulled it together to bring the Crusades. And Armenian soldiers and military and the people who had moved to Cilicia, they played a very, very key role. Then the Crusades started undermining the Armenians, and then everything started going to shit. So that's quite interesting too. I have an entire ChatGPT conversation on the Crusades just from the Armenian perspective of how much Armenia played a role. And it's quite fascinating to think how in Western memory, there's zero mention of Armenia. Just because it was rolled under Byzantine Empire, even though it kept its language, it kept there was still a recognized Armenian contractor state, let's call it. So it wasn't just like, oh, now we're Greek. No, we're still Armenian. And despite all that quite interesting history, the West doesn't speak of it. And then from there, again, it just was never the same again. Look at this. Seljuks took over. Islam. Then Mongols. Did you guys see this? This is freaking insane. Look at this. I posted this. Can you see it? Yeah. So I posted this. I was like, we might get some truth out of these people eventually. I do think they're the children of Genghis Khan. They're Turks mixed with Caucasians, which is a chemical catastrophe. The DNA was like, what? Now we have BB type people and the likes. So here's what this guy said. Whether it's his AI or real, I think he's actually alive, because this latest thing that came out, I was like, yeah, that looks pretty alive.
If people want to be naive, that they don't see the kind of world we're living in. In this world, it's not enough to be moral. It's not enough to be just. It's not enough to be right, One of the greatest writers of the 20th century, someone that I admire a lot, was the historian Will Durant. He wrote The Lessons of History, very brief, 100-page book, in which he said, well, history proves that, unfortunately and unhappily, Jesus Christ has no advantage over Genghis Khan. Because if you are strong enough, ruthless enough, powerful enough, evil will overcome good.
Granted, he's quoting someone. He's not the one saying that. But it's a very interesting thing that he decides to quote. And then, of course, he adds that sadly, unfortunately, but clearly Christians do not think that, right? Christians don't think that their God is helpless. And they believe that good will overcome evil through morality, through the correct actions, not giving in to evil. Very insane thing that came out lately. This came out at the time when everybody was like, where is BB? What's going on? So most people think that was AI. I don't know what to think. Obviously, it's really hard to discern, but it's possible that he's alive. A couple of things came out that makes me think he's probably alive. Maybe he was just hiding for a reason or two, or taking a break, or I don't know what he was doing. But he also came out and said something about the Messiah coming. The Jewish Messiah basically will come. It might not be next Thursday, but he's gonna come. And this is very, very interesting things to keep track of, because they keep playing the spiritual radical side of just wanting the radical spiritual types to get in on it and to see this as a spiritual battle. From the people's perspective, it is a spiritual battle, because we are seeing good and evil battling in reality. But again, I don't think people like him see it that way. I think people like him are exploiting it to their advantage because they know that that's going to win some people over. But Christian ought to ask, if our guy has no power over evil, so you just spit on his face, then your guy is coming, not next Tuesday, but he's coming, and that's definitely not our guy because we don't believe, and in fact you disrespect our guy massively in Talmud. So then what does that mean? Like, how can any Christian be behind this? I don't understand. Okay, going back to the dynasties. Okay, now it's like Turk, Mongol, and then the Safavid Empire is an interesting one because this is Azeri-Kurdish rule, actually. I don't know if Persians see Safavid as Persian because I think the Azeris have mixed with them quite a lot, and Kurds have been always nomadic tribes. Any Kurd I've ever met in my life, they presented themselves as Persian, and then later I realized they're Kurdish and they clarified it. I honestly don't know what's the true genetic makeup of Persians today. Are they very, very mixed with Azeris, or is there a racism among Persians versus other Persians, and the so-called Aryans versus the mixed? I don't know. So again, comment, Persians, what's going on? Are you guys racist among each other? So during this Safavid phase, what's interesting, this is why I don't know, is this really Azeri Kurdish, is this Persian? During this phase is when the Julfa Armenia story happened, where the Shah Abbas brought the Armenians, although he kind of used and exploited Armenians, but it is said that he had great respect for them. He brought the Armenians to Julfa because they were about to destroy the real Julfa, and had Armenians build the trade system. Basically, our today's global financial system, a lot of the elements that created that system was put together with the Julfa Armenians. But it was more decentralized. It was not centralized. And then all of a sudden, like, a lot of destruction happens during this time. And then the Rothschilds rise in Europe and take over that title, basically. So I have an episode on that. It's episode 35, The Forgotten Architects of Global Finance. It's an interesting one. You should check that out if you'd like. But let's go back to this. So that's the period, the Shah Abbas period, this Azeri Kurdish period that, kind of created quite a bit. And then also they unified modern Iran. They made it Shia. So as you know, current day Azeris are Shia too. I think Azeris and Iranians are the only Shia, are they? Don't quote me on that one. But they're the most prominent Shia groups I know of. I don't know if there are more. But this is when they made it Shia, and they were violent in conversions. They absolutely converted all the Sunnis into Shia. And I believe for a moment they were actually thriving. They brought back some architecture and they started building again a little bit. So it wasn't the dumpster fire that was for centuries. Look at this one. The Mongols, mass slaughter and city destructions. I think all of history can at least agree that Mongols are written and remembered to be absolutely the worst when it comes to military power. The worst as in the best, as in they created the most slaughter and pain, and they enjoyed it. That's the crazy part. That's why when I look back at some of the behavior of modern day people that enjoy slaughter, they look like they get off on it. You wonder if they're the children of Genghis Khan. Okay, then comes the Qajar dynasty, so-called. And my understanding is that the current Khomeini and Khamenei, the 1979 and onwards, are also belonging of the Qajar dynasty. I don't remember where I read that. It's not here for sure. But I do believe the Islamic regime of today is also considered Qajar. Maybe wrong on that one, but I think I remember that. Turkic era, they kept Iran independent from Britain and Russia. This is basically the time when, of course, America had formed and Britain, was a massive power. A lot was happening on that front. Barbary wars with America. So a lot is happening in the world. And now they're basically facing another power. And here is when UK creates a coup against these Qajars, these Turks, and puts the first Shah, the Pahlavi Shah, Reza Shah Pahlavi. It says how he accomplished modernizing the army and infrastructure, but criticism was that he was dictatorial, forced to abdicate. I don't know what that means, but I do know that he is the one that changed the name of Persia to Iran and was working to, or at least the propaganda was that they're going to bring back the glory of Iran. Needless to say, Persians who remember the glorious days are going to want that, right? So regardless whether it was a coup or what it was, people were behind it. So Reza Shah Pahlavi comes on board, but I don't remember the exact reason as to why he then got replaced by his son. So the second Pahlavi is the Pahlavi we have watched together in the last episode. Very charismatic guy. And all of them, they speak English. They're trained with the US or UK, first UK, then US military. So they all speak English, perfect English. It's put in place to be a pro-Western rule. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that, right? If you think about it, because if this was truly not about exploitation and greed, if this was truly about like, okay, we need to push back Islam that just not only took over this region, it turned it into shit and kept it as shit. So why not bring back the great civilizations that were lost? I would be all for that. And for the majority of my life, I was for that. I don't want Islam in that region. I actually would be perfectly fine if Islam as a religion disappeared. I'm not saying Islamic people disappeared. I'm saying Islam as a religion disappeared. I don't want any people to be harmed or to die. I want people to find common grounds and spirituality and stop. And this religion being used constantly to divide people, to kill each other. It would be nice if that wasn't the case, but obviously we don't live in a world like that. That's just, fairy tales. So he gets put in place. And then what happens in 1951 is interesting. A democracy shift happens, because now we're just constantly talking about democracy, right? We're spreading democracy. The Shah is in power, the second Shah, but he's not the full power. There's still PMs that get elected or, he doesn't have full control. Democratically elected Musadegh, it says it's Persian, I'm not sure. His name is Mohammed, but it says it's Persian, so hard to tell. Is he really Persian or not? But I guess maybe you would say Persian because the Shah dynasty is Persian. Mossadegh comes in and he nationalized the oil industry. That's quite interesting because up until then, the West is basically, there's Chevron, Exxon, so all the Western companies are rubbing Iran dry. Like basically Iran gets none of the benefits of their oil. Everything is going through the West. And this guy comes in and he nationalized the oil. What's interesting is when you look at the common denominator between Iraq, Maduro, Venezuela, many others, nationalizing the oil and wanting to use your own resources for your own country has been what has targeted a lot of these people. So I would say there is a spiritual shift, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that perhaps we have evolved enough where we no longer are killing each other purely on the religious front. It's all now about the oil. Much better, right? Obviously being sarcastic. But the religion still gets used. And of course, the animosity still exists. There is still a stigma between Christian versus Islam versus Jews. All kind of, in a way, not liking each other. All thinking they're more right than the other and so on. What's interesting is, I don't know where the Buddhists at. I don't know what happened. But looks like they're chill. They're just like sitting on the top of a mountain waiting for the day, I don't know, to enter the other kingdom. I don't know enough about Buddhism, but they're quiet. I like that. And what happens? Color revolution. Okay? We know about the color revolutions now. There's just a long list of color revolutions nowadays. In all of East Europe, in Armenia, it happened in 2018. Belarus, they tried, but they failed. And Ukraine, they definitely did a color revolution. Basically, it's just when the West, with Soros-backed funding, puts a pro-Western, pro-Israel government and gives a color to that revolution because the CIA and the military is involved. White revolution is what happened in Iran, and they basically created a coup, took out Mossadegh, and they gave the full power to Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. Okay, so now there's yet another Pahlavi right now in the West who has been trained in the West, has gone to military trained in the West, speaks perfect English. His daughter, the younger daughter, just married a Jew. His older daughter is the next in throne, so-called, if he becomes put in place again for pro-Western, pro-Israel puppet. And the thing is, I can see why and how so many Persians would be okay with that. They're sick and tired of the Islamic regime. Most Persians I've met, in fact, I've never met a Persian who actually identified himself or herself as a Muslim. That's a very Arabic phenomena. Like, you meet a Palestinian or you meet somebody and you say, oh, what are you? And they say, I'm Muslim. You're like, that's not what I asked. Like, that's not a race, that's a religion. So that's crazy to me. And I wonder if that's also psychological programming. In the Persian case, no Persian has ever identified themselves, in my experience, as Muslim or Middle Eastern or whatever. They say I'm Persian or I'm Iranian, and most of the time they are, even if they say they're Muslim, you can tell that they don't actually like it. They don't want to be Muslim. They just say it because that's what they are culturally. And most of them that I know have denounced it already. And so many more in the country, is from what I hear, they're done. They're either going to go no religion because they recognize what Islam has done to their home, or I don't know if there are some conversions happening. I don't know what they will convert into, if they will become an atheist country like, let's say, Albania did. But either way, they are not with this Islamic regime. This is why we see so much Western propaganda that uses that, right? Uses the Iranians who don't want the Islamic regime to say this is what they want, we're liberating them, and so on and so forth, when we know that's not what they're doing. I would imagine there's only, this is my opinion, I could be completely wrong, I would imagine there's a small percentage of Iranians who actually are cheering on a foreign nation to bomb them. I would imagine more of them maybe see this as an opportunity for change, but I doubt they are happy to be bombed. Although one or two Iranian friends have been reporting that when they talk to people back home, they seem to actually just be super hopeful, waiting for, without doing anything to take back their country, they're hoping all good things will come. I just personally don't think that's possible. You do not cheer on an enemy that wants you dead, who has been dehumanizing you, calling you radical terrorists as a whole nation, not just there's mixed signals, right? Sometimes they try to appeal to a certain crowd and they say, oh, Iranian people are great and they're not radicals, it's just their government. And then another time when they're preparing to bomb the crap out of them, they just start dehumanizing and calling them all terrorists, like a brushstroke of all terrorists. I do want to read one comment that I saved from a viewer because it's an Iranian perspective, but again, remember, this is only one person. So this doesn't mean all Persians feel this way, but I think I want to read this one. I'll black out the name just because I don't know if this person wants to be blasted, on the web. But he said, he or she, you are mistaken about the Shah being installed by the US. So that one, I'm not mistaken. This is this is very well recorded and known. So I'm not sure why he's resisting that, because again, UK and US or nobody's ever refuted that this is the case. So actually the US coup failed. Oh, okay. Sorry, I guess let me read. US coup failed. It was the Iranian people who stood up against Mossadegh because he had dissolved the parliament and taken the role of dictator. It was only when the Iranian people succeeded that the US aligned with them. Again, maybe there's more to the story, but US and UK definitely were pushing the Shah. And the Shah agreed with Mossadegh on the nationalization of oil in Iran, but because the US had no power in Iran, it could not force the Shah to change this policy. Shah did not change the policy of basically giving back the oil to US powers, but it did give back the control. All the oil refineries and how it gets processed and what it goes through, he gave that back to US. So he did give away quite a bit, but it wasn't like a full blown kind of like, here, like it's yours. Definitely not. It should be mentioned that then Mossadegh comes from former manor owners who were used to suppress the peasant people. So this is interesting because I know that the Shah and the Savak police that he formed were brutal and ruthless against people. So this is a particular perspective. So he did not care about them. And he was the puppet of the Soviet Union. Again, here we are, pro-West, pro-Russia, which wanted to incorporate Iran in its empire in the same way as it had done in Europe, in Eastern Europe after World War II. But I think that you are correct that the Shah was considered an enemy by Israel. I'll play something, I'm not so sure, because he wanted the Jews to restore their land that it had occupied. Okay, there's a lot of truth to what he's saying, and then some things that I disagree with. And he was critical of the Jewish influence on US policy. In fact, I would not rule out that State of Israel had a role in the revolution in 1979. I wouldn't rule that out, actually. They wanted to get a more friendly puppet in charge of Iran, and just after the revolution, a socialist was put in power for a very short time before Khomeini took power and turned out to be a far worse dictator of Iran. And frankly, you are undoubtedly correct about the Yom Kippur War. You deserve, okay. So this is very interesting, right? This is one particular perspective. I don't want to dismiss it. I do know that US and UK were behind coups, multiple coups, pushing Pahlavis, just like they are doing right now, in front of our eyes. This one you cannot dispute, right? That hardcore pushing the current last Pahlavi, or I don't know if it's last, technically his daughters, but they're pushing the Pahlavi. The guy is just almost squirming for Israel. He's like a walking commercial of Israel. I don't want to go and try to find those clips. Anybody who's on social media probably have seen him basically kissing the wall, just like everybody else with the yarmulke. And then, but besides that, he actually goes above and beyond to constantly talk about how grand Israel is and Israelis and so on and so forth. He's a walking commercial for Israel. And to me, I can't see that as pro-Iranian. So what that tells me is that the game remains exactly the same. This is pro-West and pro-Russia. It's the constant battle between pro-West, pro-Russia, which I'm not so sure that there is actually a battle between West and Russia. I think that's the psyop. I think that's the biggest psyop. Do you know what third world means? I didn't know this until one day I was like, I was telling someone like, oh, Armenia, third world country. And then I was like, wait, why do I say that? Like, Armenia is not third world in a sense of like poverty. It's not like Africa, some parts of Africa. And then I looked it up and I was like, why is Armenia considered third world? It's like, oh, it's not. It's okay. So it's complicated because the definition of third world changed. That's why. And what third world means or meant before, it literally meant that you're a country that is neither pro-Russia nor pro-US nor pro-West. First world meant you're pro-West. Second world meant you're pro-Russia. Third world meant you're neither pro this or pro that. You're neutral. Basically, third world meant good, in my opinion. And then somehow that whole definition changed, just like sometimes today definitions just magically change. And the entire meaning changed. All of a sudden, we use third world to describe impoverished countries. Granted, Armenia is not like, super wealthy, but Armenia is not a impoverished country. We've always had very good civilization. We always have been builders. Armenia has never been third world in a sense how we understand third world, basically. Back to some of the things that the guy or the girl, the person was saying is it possible that Mossadegh was not good for Iran and he was trying to do X, Y, and Z? Well, his action is that he did something extremely right. He nationalized the oil, which could not be a bad thing. That's a very pro-Iranian move. Of course he would have enemies, and of course he would have people who don't agree with him, and I wonder if this is one of those things. Or maybe I don't know. It's hard to tell what happened there, but US was behind installing the Shah. for sure. However, the reason why I don't want to dismiss what this person is saying is because when you listen to the speech of the Shah, it becomes quite interesting. There is something to it that makes me wonder, because he's an interesting character, very interesting character. He says a lot of things and doesn't say a lot of things. And you can tell, of course, that he has his own propaganda. Without a doubt, every leader speaking, they're spewing their propaganda. But this is him speaking on the oil.
Shah, who is the friend of Israel, benefits from the high price of oil caused by our embargo.
Yeah, but only enemies of Iran could have told you that. First of all, why friend of Israel?
Why?
In what sense?
Well, economic cooperation.
How much?
I don't know the extent of
It
it.
doesn't come even to $2 or $3 million a year.
Intelligence cooperation.
You can get that kind of intelligence even in reading American newspapers.
It is common knowledge that they trained or helped to train your secret police, the Savak. You do have a relationship with the Israelis,
Yes,
there's no
that's
doubt.
ridiculous, but we have the same relationship with all the friendly Arab countries that we train also in this country. This means nothing.
The industrial nations, among them, of course, the United States, feel that you, sir, have pushed too far, too fast, and that you can trigger worldwide depression by doing it. Henry Kissinger says so. Sheikh Yamani, the oil minister of Saudi
because
Arabia, says so.
that suits them. I'm not talking about Yamani because I don't like to enter into that subject. But the others, it suits them to say that. Why? Because the price that we have set for oil was one of the lowest among the prices which were studied and suggested to the OPEC organization by all the experts.
You say you don't want to talk about Saudi Arabia and Sheikh Yamani. Saudi Arabia, #1 oil producer, has certainly as great a stake as you do. And yet, he says, it's going to trigger depression. It's going to trigger trouble.
He has been told to say that. I'm sorry to say this.
By?
I'm not going to mention any names.
Well, by President Nixon?
I'm not going to mention any names. Ask the other member of the OPEC, all those experts in the OPEC, what they think.
What kind of pressure can somebody put upon Sheikh Yamani to say it, unless his own king says say it?
You just go and ask those people.
Okay, I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's so worth watching him and observe his body language and everything. Again, keep in mind, he has his own agenda and own propaganda. But it's very, very interesting. When you bring it all together, it almost sounds like him and Nixon both had a lot of pressure from AIPAC. For whatever reason, he does kind of downplay the Israeli pressure in this moment. But then 2 years later, in a different interview, he talks about AIPAC and their pressure on the US. Watch my last episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. I don't want to replay the same clips. Then if you listen to Nixon, so it's very interesting to watch a lot of these clips from different leaders of the same time and then kind of like pull it together as to what is the overall sentiment. Even if Shah wasn't US-backed coup, rather the coup failed, then I don't know who is he thinking that they were trying to put in place, because UK and US always openly say that it was the Shah. And right now they're doing the same, right? They want to bring this Shah's son into the mix of things. He clearly was put in place by the West, but that doesn't automatically mean he now is perfect puppet, right? Like I think this is where people simplify things into, oh, just because he was put in place by US or by the West or by Russia, then all of a sudden that's it. Now they're just like marionettes, you can just, no, he's a ruler now. He has power of a massive country with millions of people. Obviously, he cannot think of himself as a puppet. No human, unless they just have zero dignity. And there are some people like that in US politics right now that you look at, like the Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, and people that are just slave mentality, and they happily will be puppets of anything. They're just revolting, spineless, cowardly, completely unaware, stupid, low IQ. I hate using that term, but very low IQ. This guy doesn't seem that way. Just like Putin, regardless whether he is a Chabadnik or not, whether his mother is Jewish or not. I don't know. I think Putin couldn't care less. Just like Maduro. Maduro was a Sephardic Jew, but he was constantly talking shit about Israel. I really just don't think things are black and white because all these Jewish leaders have been put in place. That means Israel or US are perfectly controlling them. Clearly not. Some maybe are in line, but not all of them. And in this case of Shah, it's very, very interesting. I don't know how much of it is real versus propaganda. His Savak police is known to have been brutal. He brought a lot of communism into the culture. One of the reasons why Iranians overthrew him and then the Islamic regime took over and the Islamic regime was able to take over was because they were seeing a degradation of the culture to a crazy degree where, you know, there's just all this modernity and feminism and LGBTQism and communism is all coming in. They're taking land ownership and then just kind of dividing it up. Again, a little bit communistic type of let's share the wealth type of thing, but only let's take the wealth from people who have worked hard on it. Not let's share our oil wealth, let's take it from other people. But either way, it's an interesting time, and I do think it creates a very particular difficulty in just brush stroking this because, again, I don't support an Islamic regime. So I don't blame Iranians who desperately want the glorious Cyrus the Great era of Persia back. Obviously, if there was a way, let's say you snap your fingers and you say, hey, Armenia could gain back all of its kingdom, would you want it? Of course I would want it. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I wouldn't want it due to a mass slaughter of people. I don't think I would turn my eye to it because, again, our morality. But would I want something to shift and Armenia be able to gain things back? Granted, you don't get things back without wars. That's the thing. Like, this is what Israel uses. Not because that's what they're doing. This is what Israel uses to gain support of Christians and Israelis or Jews who are thinking like, how could you be so blind? How could you dismiss all the Islamic conquest and just focus on this particular period of history? We need to murder all Palestinians. I can't get behind that because Palestinians are people who have nothing to do with that. They've been just as subjugated to Islam just like anybody else in that region. All the Greeks and Armenians who are Turkish now, their ancestors have been raped and they've become a different race now, right? Like a culture, not a race, because genetically, again, they would predominantly be Greek and Armenian, and then a little mixture of maybe 5% Turkic, but very minimal. But they have established a new language, new culture, and are proud nationals of this nation that has raped their ancestors, right? So when I think back what has happened to my people and the insane pain they have suffered consistently throughout history just for wanting to keep their faith, just for wanting to keep their own version of morality and not give in to other people's ideas of what is morality. I don't want to revenge in a bloody sense. Like, what do you do, right? Like, that's what I'm trying to say. What do you do? I just think this is when maybe defensive versus offensive would be justified. Israel keeps trying to say that they're defending themselves, but all we see is that they're attacking. If Turkey all of a sudden decided to march forward and hit and take over the remaining, like Greece, Armenia, which Israel would not give a shit. He would allow that to happen in a heartbeat. But if they were marching forward and then let's say Israel said, no, I do not want the last remaining Christians to disappear here because after that they're going to come to, Israel and whatever. And then the entire world stood and fought back. I think that would be a fair fight and I would not oppose that. But if that's actually happening, we are hearing that Iran was a threat to the world, but we've never seen that. Actually, in reality, Iran was not a threat. Even with the insane amount of sanctions, they were not lashing out. That's not what we were seeing, and that's my observations. I understand the regular Jewish perspective because from their mindset, they're thinking Look at that entire thousands of years of oppression and blood and slaughter to take over. Why can't we have this little land, or why can't we push these people back? If that's what you were doing, nobody would bat an eye. But what we're seeing is ideologically driven butchery through a lot of deceit, gaslighting, and psychological warfare that is actually more aimed at the West than at Islam. And if you look at Jewish rabbis, they have no beef with Islam. They think Islamic people are their brothers in faith because they believe in the same God. It's Christians who are deluded in believing Jesus. So we don't have the same enemy as Israel. Israel sees us as the enemy while gaslighting us as if they think Islam is the enemy of all. Now, granted, Islam does say kill Jews and Christians, and they have, but the current Zionist nation state of Israel is extremely Orwellian. It's nothing but doublespeak. They say one thing, but the actions suggest something other. And what they're after is to eradicate the West. Actually, they see the West as the biggest enemy. And I think I will go ahead and conclude this episode on a very interesting clip. Don't leave me yet. I'm going to play this clip, but I am going to insert. If you guys made it this far, please consider subscribing. My channel is thoroughly suppressed. My episodes that are doing well are all slowly getting deleted. And I honestly am starting to, I don't understand, how are those big channels who are criticizing Israel operating? They probably are not saying what I'm saying. They probably are, I don't know. Why is a small channel like mine suppressed? Is it just so that yet another voice doesn't rise up? Or am I saying things that other big channels are not saying? Am I hitting a nerve? I don't know, but it is extremely frustrating because I put a lot of work into this, and then it's really hard to then see that suppression. I did drop new merch. This is the best way to support me. If you guys go to the merch shop and see if there's anything you like here. I dropped this new noticing sign as I talked in this episode about the Christ is King being anti-Semitic, noticing being anti-Semitic, as well as we went over the history and the Crusades and so on and so forth. I think this design is quite lovely in my opinion for those who are not super anti-cross, wearing types. But in case you are, I also have this one where it just says noticing and then the US map and how it's being overtaken by Zionism. So a little more bold, I guess. And of course, my Signal Before Silence shirts, the Armenian cross. I have to do an episode on Celtics. I have to do research first on Celtics. I keep coming across, a lot of you have been telling me to look into Irish history. Now I'm starting to see Irish mythology that they came from the Armenian Highlands. Do I have Irish people watching? Can you drop comments? Tell me about that. I need to dive in and do research, but I came across some mythologies, both British and Irish, that are linking themselves to the Armenian Highlands. And I don't know if that's just purely because they want to link themselves to early Christianity. Maybe that's it. That's only the reason. But in the case of the Irish and the Celtics, they have this. They carve stones exactly in this style. So that's only Armenians and Celtics do this, or Irish do. I need to do research. I don't even know if they're still if Celtics are the pre-Irish or I need to do a lot of research on that front. And then we have the Stop Noticing, because apparently noticing is anti-Semitic, which I didn't even know. When I designed this shirt, I had no idea that noticing is classified as an anti-Semitic trope, which is absolutely absurd. Shenanigans detector is still here, but I think I'm going to take this down eventually. And then, of course, the Ancient Sun Cross, which I personally love and will, learn a lot about that one of these days. Okay, let me go back to showing you a clip before we exit, because I think it's an incredibly good one. This war that Israel keeps pretending they're fighting for Christians, and basically they're helping the entire world. They're pushing back terrorist and Islamic expansionism because the entire world is under threat. I'm arguing that that is not so, because Jews and Islam are far closer and they're far more brotherly to each other than Christianity and Judaism, because in the eyes of Jews, the West is what they need to defeat. And I'm going to show you how that comes straight out of their own mouths. All this boogeyman, Iran bad, that is, that's just for resources. That's just, they want to destabilize Iran, because Persians are very forward-thinking, progressive people. They're brilliant people. And Israel doesn't want any brilliance in that region. It wants to be the only civilization that looks like a civilization in that place and take over all the resources. Yet they see the West as what needs to be destabilized. And think about it. America right now is putting all of its resources and potentially collapsing on itself and its economy, draining its military arsenal. For what exactly? When this is what comes out of their mouths.
I think there's another revolution coming. I tend to steer it along with the achievement of a broader peace. When history is within reach.
So what Israel is fighting here is not merely a seven-front war, but an eight-front war. It's called the Jews against Rome. Rome and Jerusalem clashed over values, with a great tragedy for the Jewish people. Well, we lost that one. We have to win the next one. But the new Rome, the United States, Jews against Rome.
We stopped playing defense and have moved to offense.
Straight out of their mouths. This clip called The Eighth Front is very good. If you haven't seen, definitely check it out. Harrison Smith stitched it together. It's extremely good. It's nothing but their own words coming out of their mouths. And I think it's very telling. That's the thing. They say US is the new Rome, and they're fighting Rome. Granted, we have to consider that it's stitched up from different speeches, but it's the same guy, right? You don't just constantly call America the new Rome and then turn around and talk about that you're fighting Rome and you're going to win this one. So someone can argue that in one different setting, he means Rome as in civilization and the great empire. He's not talking about winning or toppling that civilization. But again, this is the same guy. If this were two different people saying those things and they were stitched together, I would be like, okay, there's probably a nuance we're missing here. But this is the same exact person. And last but not least, this episode is getting long. I want to also play this.
America today, we have white supremacy. In the Torah, we had Amalek. Amalek is seen as the eternal enemy of our people, whose members found strength by making us suffer. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, and the land that the Lord your God is giving to you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Our rabbinic sages parse these sentences and derive two distinct meanings. Blotting out the memory of Amalek is a military command, literally to destroy Amalek. Now, facing today's Amalek, we are reminded that the Torah calls us not just to escape, but to extirpate Amalek. We are commanded to do real and literal battle against it. That means coming off the bench in the fight against white supremacy. It means putting our reputations and our money our physical bodies on the line, but also so that we are ready to answer people with radically destructive and incoherent versions of history, so that we can counter white supremacists, so that we can counter Amalek and blot them out by retaining on our lips and in our records their history. By being bearers of history, we can help guide the future.
Okay. Between playing videos as well as calling rabbinic texts, I can show you how exactly they have step by step called certain things Amalek, then gone after it. Called it Amalek, then gone after it. Palestinians were Amalek. Armenians in 10th century onwards were Amalek. Okay? The genocide, the Armenian genocide was committed by members of Donme Jews, Jewish people who were Donme as in crypto Jews, who believed in these prophecies. They followed the Sabbatian line of Judaism. They belonged to a free Masonic lodge that was entirely Jewish. And yeah, they were Turkish nationals. They were in Turkey, just like right now. You have Jews that are American that only now you're realizing that their loyalty is not to America. Or you have Jews in Russia that just blend in just like Russians. In Poland, in Germany, everywhere. The same thing happened during the Ottoman Empire. None of the architects of the genocide were actually Turkish as far as DNA goes. They were, Gypsy, Sephardic Jew, this, that. And then slowly you just see how they move this goalpost. They have literally decided that the entire world is Amalek. Everybody but Jews are Amalek. And they got to blot them out. And in the last few decades alone, we have seen that happen in front of our eyes in the Middle East. So many countries fell, right? Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. Iran now was on that list. Now they're attacking Iran. Palestine is as good as gone. And the so-called white supremacy is, you can kind of perk your ears and kind of figure out what is white supremacy. We are white supremacists. Anybody who criticizes something they don't like, it's white supremacy or anti-Semitic, and they go hand in hand. And that's Amalek. So what is this war for exactly? Okay, oil, money, power, greed. But from the Rabbinic perspective and the Talmudic perspective, it's also extremely spiritual. It needs to be this final battle of Gog and Magog and bringing the Messiah. It's insane. It's extremely insane, and this is not going to stop with Iran, okay? Everything that you can listen to Netanyahu's speech, and the exact opposite of that is true, oftentimes. I'm not saying that means the exact opposite doesn't mean all of a sudden Islam is a great religion. I'm just saying that Iran was not attacking anyone. Iran did not have a map that expands borders like Israel does, the Great Israel map or the Pax Judaica map that Maduro has actually talked about and has shown. Turkey, Azerbaijan, all of these Turkish nations have an expansionist map along with Israel. They all behave quite identical. They all have incredibly shady histories. And one of them is Bolshevik created and very strategic. And it's just really starting to look like truly Genghis Khan's children are trying to take over the world while constantly using psychological warfare to subvert the mind into... There's a really good, actually, I'm going to find it because this will say it so much better than I'm struggling to say it. But there's a book called Freemasonry and Judaism. The extraordinary skillfulness of the hidden Masonic power consisted in making France work for its own destruction and in using the people to overthrow everything which really protected them. Lying and hypocrisy have been the characteristics of all revolutionary movements in the world since 1789 up to our time. I think it is so well said because that's precisely what's happening with the US. They are using the exact same skillful tactics to overthrow US through us, through American people. Basically, American people right now, the Lindsey Grahams and the Ted Cruzes and all these Christian Zionists and many Americans who support this, they are working towards their own destruction. And it's extremely, extremely visible to me. That's my opinion. That is my opinion. All right. Thank you guys again. I'll see you next time.